Thank you very much for waiting. From now, we would like to commence GX League Symposium 2022 Autumn Session 2. In Session 2, we are welcoming internationally recognized expert on ESG management, Ms. Helle Jorgensen. After 40 minutes of keynote speech, we will be discussing on how decarbonization leads to corporate and economic growth, including global perspectives. Now, let us move on to the keynote speech. First of all, we would like to briefly introduce Ms. Helle Jorgensen. Ms. Helle Jorgensen is an internationally recognized expert on sustainable business practices, with a 30-year track record of turning sustainability-related risks into innovative and profitable business opportunities. In 2022, she was awarded both the Sustainability X magazine's Global 50 Women in Sustainability Award and Canada's Most Powerful Woman Top 100 award winner by the Women's Executive Network. Prior to that, she received the Global Impact Award and was named one of 5 people in ESG to look out for in 2020 and Clean 50 in 2019. She is also the founder and chief executive at Competent Boards, the world's leader in boardroom education on topics related to sustainability and climate action. Before launching Competent Boards in 2019, she built the Canadian chapter of the United Nations Global Compact, bringing the Sustainable Development Goals to the Canadian government. She developed PwC's sustainability and climate change practice in Denmark and the United States. In addition to this, as you can see, she serves on multiple advisory panels. Now, the floor is yours.
Arigatou gozaimashita. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I want to thank the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry and the GX League office, as well as the business leaders from the GX League for having me here with you as your speaker, keynote speaker for this seminar. It is truly an honor to speak here about the opportunities associated with decarbonization and transitioning to net zero. I also want to congratulate all of you members of the GX League who are present here today. I am very impressed by what I heard about future visions, what I heard about the view on how to value the opportunities and include them in investment decisions, including the avoided emissions that we also call Scope 4. Your decision to participate in this paramount initiative, have set you apart, can set you apart, and as a path to becoming leaders of your respective industries and, of course, supporters of Japan's transitioning to net zero. I hope that I can help share your wisdom and the actions I heard earlier this morning with business leaders, board members, and investors worldwide. So what is sustainability and why is it so important for business? Well, in a world of responsible investing, sustainability criteria are often used to evaluate how a company identifies, acknowledges, and manages risk, as Saki-san from Nomura Holdings was mentioning earlier this morning. Sustainability is based upon the basic notion of meeting the current needs of society today without sacrificing resources for future generations. One of the biggest sustainability risks is the topic of today's discussion, climate change and decarbonization. But it is not just about the risks. Behind every risk lies an even greater opportunity. Those companies that can identify and manage risks, well, they also have a better chance to turn these risks into business opportunities. Something I've helped so many companies on a global scale do. Just think about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They could be viewed as the biggest pain points in the world, but also the world's biggest opportunities. A CEO from a pension fund we work with will tell you that the national SDG plans are like a big catalog of opportunities for investment and also export, including SDG 13 on urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. The growing spotlight on climate-related risk and opportunities have been, well, followed by fast evolving stakeholder expectations of companies and their boards. Shareholders, for instance, want to know that the business they are investing in have a sustainable business model that will allow them to not only survive, but to thrive in the years to come. Think about employees, consumers, other stakeholders that are also taking a stand, choosing to support companies that adhere to these expectations and operate responsibly. There was a study in 2021 that found that 79% of people surveyed in the United States, as well as the European Union, would pay a premium to support sustainable food products. Another study out of the New York Stern Center for Sustainable Business found that over the last 5 years, the demand for sustainably marketed products grew up to 7 times faster than that of the conventionally market counterparts. As a result, sustainability has seen unparalleled market growth. This year in particular, investors, business leaders, government officials around the world, they're focused on advancing the climate pledges like we are talking about here and other environmental concerns. There's also social concerns on top of mind: diversity, equity, inclusion, worker well-being, and biodiversity protection. Companies that acknowledge the expectations of their stakeholders and choose to lead with purpose will undoubtedly find themselves better prepared for the uncertainty that lies ahead. And this brings us to the topic of today's discussion. How can GX lead companies, you all here, how can you help Japan achieve its nationally determined contributions while also positioning yourself as competitive in the low carbon markets of the future? Companies and the countries they operate in are working to understand how best to reduce their carbon footprints and get a better grasp on how climate change will impact their operations, the societies they operate in, as well as employees, suppliers, and customers. So you already been touching upon it and heard in terms of children, but we are in the global climate crisis. Climate change and its associated impacts have become one of the most prominent topics in the modern world. It is a business risk, but it is also an international crisis that if we ignore it, and thank you for not ignoring it, but if we ignore it, will threaten the survival of virtually all species on this planet, including us humans. Extreme weather events, wildfires, extreme heat, droughts, and major flooding are becoming more intense and commonplace. If we look at this year alone, we witnesses record-breaking heat waves and their impact on human systems around the globe. In Europe this past summer, wildfires were rampant, particularly throughout Spain and Portugal. But if we looked at France and France's capacity to generate electricity, that was impacted when water used to cool their nuclear facilities began to dry up. Similarly, if we look to Germany, ships could not make safe passage along the Rhine River because its water levels had sunk so low due to the heat. Let's go to India and Pakistan. Temperatures exceeded, well over 40 degrees Celsius for a prolonged period of time. Monsoon flooding also left, nearly a third of Pakistan underwater and affected as many as 33 million people, and unfortunately also resulted in the death of 1,500. Asia's longest river, the Yangtze, which is also responsible for 20% of China's GDP, reached its lowest level since 1865. Critical freshwater reservoirs in the US also experienced new lows, resulting in water restrictions throughout the Western and Midwestern regions. Well, unfortunately, we are warned that this is, it is only the beginning. The United Nations' latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report revealed that the impacts that we have felt from climate change so far are worse than what was previously anticipated. So on top of that, our current instability or inability to address this global crisis is expected to lead to mass extinctions of land, animals, famine, and those extreme weather events becoming even more common. We need to take a deep breath here. Now, let's put that in context to your business. Let's think about your business and how you are or might be impacted. In other words, we need business leaders. We need business leaders like yourself to not only see the risks that climate change will impose on your businesses, but also the opportunities of being a climate leader. The fact that you are all here as members of the GX Leagues, it tells me that you are leaders that not only will reduce your risk, but also embrace the opportunity and competitive advantage of being a climate leader, a global climate leader. And again, what I heard this morning, I was very excited to hear your ideas, and I might comment on that a little bit later. So let's look at decarbonization and Japan's transition to net zero. And you might know this much better than I do, but allow me. So what does decarbonization mean in practical terms? It describes any process that seeks to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or reduces the amount of carbon dioxide that is released by burning fossil fuels. Japan has many unique strengths that it can use to its advantage when pursuing nationwide decarbonization efforts. So to achieve near-term emissions reductions, of course, companies can focus on improving the energy efficiency of their business operations. Sounds like you're already doing that. And Japan is already a leader when it comes to this, also compared to other industry nations like Germany and the United States. And I'm impressed by your extensive railway structure, something that is much better than ours in Canada. Sorry if anyone from Canada is listening. And I have to admit, I'm looking very much forward to experiencing it when I will be visiting you, Japan, in December. But that also provides citizens with an economic and eco-friendly alternative to driving their own car. Further, because Japan's buildings are regularly updated to withstand earthquakes, there is even more opportunity to also install energy-saving devices and perhaps join the list of the world's most energy-efficient buildings. We have one in London, the one in Berkeley Place in the UK. There's the powerhouse Kyoto in Norway. There's many others. So that's an opportunity. But when we start to compare the various economic sectors based on their global contribution of greenhouse gases, energy production claims to top at approximately 72% of the mix. This makes decarbonization, the energy sector, the most important component of our global strategy to avoid climate catastrophe. Therefore, our primary route to successful decarbonization will be via a collective transition to using low carbon renewable energy sources. And as you explained, take carbon out of the atmosphere as well, with all of these fantastic ideas you have. But it also includes solar, wind, and hydropower. In Japan, energy production, and again, forgive me, I hope I have my data right, energy production and industry account for around 65 to 70% of your nation's greenhouse gas emissions. In Canada, our energy sector, which includes power generation and transportation, also covers a significant portion of our total emissions. Canada, Japan, and many other countries around the world are still dependent on fossil fuels for power supply. But as you'll see, certain country-specific characteristics present challenges in switching to more renewable sources. For one, deep coastal waters that surround you and your lovely country make it perhaps more difficult to install offshore wind turbines. That is different from my birth country, Denmark, which is surrounded by coastal wind farms. In Denmark, there is this Danish island, Samsø, and that in particular has become the world's first island to source 100% of their energy from renewables. However, the island's success might not be so easily emulated by other international communities. For one, there's only about 4,000 people living there, so it's a little bit less to supply energy to, and as a result, fewer offshore wind turbines and other renewables are required. But on top of that, yours sometimes spontaneous terrain and densely populated megacities might make it equally challenging to install onshore wind turbines and solar farms. In my adopted home of Canada, we have our own unique challenges. Despite having greater access to offshore areas, our current energy storage system technology makes it extremely difficult to deliver consistent power from such intermittent sources like solar and wind power. So to compensate for this, companies may be required to invest in expensive technologies such as carbon capture, storage, and uses, or what we call CCUS mechanics, or that could be added to manufacturing plants to reduce on-site emissions. But again, I liked your thoughts about what could be some innovation. So further innovations in such technologies could also result in the ability to reuse the carbon that was previously captured as a resource for production. Again, I like all of your ideas, but let me give you a few examples. So why is decarbonization good for business? Well, simply put, decarbonization provides opportunities for companies to stay competitive while also reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and costs related to losses and damages. A major component of a company's decarbonization strategy involves board of directors and senior business leaders understanding the risks that climate change will have on the bottom line, on the company, and on the stakeholders. And this includes both the physical damages, like those we discussed earlier, but also transitional risk associated with becoming net zero, or some will say net positive. So by considering how climate risk will impact business operations, companies can find opportunities to reduce cost and carbon at the same time, as well as determine which existing strategies would hinder these efforts. So let me take you as an example of the Danish energy giant Ørsted, and full transparency, I worked with Ørsted. They were once amongst the most coal-intensive organizations in all of Europe, with nearly a third of Denmark's total carbon emissions hailing from the company's operations. In 2008, the company underwent its own green transformation and has since become a global leader in clean, cost-competitive wind power. Ørsted also offers a variety of other products and services in renewable energy solutions around solar power, bioenergy, and hydrogen. So this green transformation for Ørsted has made them pioneers in the global race towards a low carbon economy. It is actually well ahead of schedule in meeting science-based reduction targets that are aligned with the Paris Agreement's goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. The company is also on track to achieving its own carbon neutrality in its operations by 2025. The Corporate Knights Global 100 Index, where you will find the world's most sustainable corporations, as well as the CDP, previously known as Carbon Disclosure Project, have both placed Ørsted within the elite, so giving them an A. That means the company shows exceptional environmental leadership in the creation and uptake of a net zero transition plan that utilize science-based targets. For a company to do this, and do it well, it must have a comprehensive understanding of its greenhouse gas emissions, of course, and climate-related risk and opportunities. And if I may add, they must have a competent board and leadership as well. I'm very pleased to share that the chairman of Ørsted, Mr. Thomas Thune Andersen, is one of Competent Board's global faculty members. So this might all sound great, but what about Ørsted's bottom line? Is this really also a financial opportunity? Did this green transformation interfere with the company's growth? Well, quite the opposite. Ørsted is now one of the largest renewable energy companies by capacity in the world. And since undergoing its green transformation, financial performance has improved significantly whilst reducing carbon emissions by an, outstanding 86%. They also claim that becoming a green energy company has facilitated the globalization of their business. Ørsted was guided by leaders who understood that climate change was becoming a political and global priority. Their previous growth strategy to expand coal, oil, and gas activities in the northwestern Europe was seen as not the right path to take anymore. And so Ørsted adopted a new vision of a world that runs entirely on green energy, acknowledging the fact that profitability and sustainability do not compete with one another. Instead, go hand in hand. I was very pleased to see that the Japan Wind Development Company working with Ørsted and Euros Energy to develop offshore projects in the Akita prefecture. Another example is the American retail corporation Walmart that launched its ambitious Project Gigaton to remove 1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases from its global value chain by 2030. The project has already attracted over 4,500 suppliers and is well underway to achieving this goal ahead of schedule. And since the launch of Project Gigaton, Walmart's stock has actually climbed roughly 55% in share value, with the company's revenue growing steadily to around $572 billion. I want to add here, when we talked about taking carbon out of product and this, what we also call the scope 4, and avoiding carbon, worked with another company that I haven't put on the slide here called Novozymes, enzyme business. And they actually worked with Walmart to say, if Walmart's suppliers, the larger corporation, use the enzymes, they could then reduce the carbon footprint in all of the products. And that's an example on a company not only looking to its direct buyers of their products, but also the end buyer, or at least the next in line. So I think that's another opportunity you could look towards, to think about what is it that the large customers out in the world are really looking for, not only the direct customer, but also the customer's customer. A final example here, look at Maersk, and I should say again, I both work with Walmart and Maersk, so forgive me here, but final example, we'll take a look at Maersk's goal of achieving net zero emissions across its business operations by 2040. This is the Danish shipping and logistic company, and they have focused their efforts on decarbonizing its operations and services via the integration of renewables and low carbon technologies. Since the introduction of these efforts, there's been a 170% year-over-year growth in demand for Maersk eco-delivery services. And in 2021, the company posted record-breaking earnings with revenue up 55% from the previous year. And Maersk logistics and service business also saw a 41% jump in revenue. So if we look at the European carbon market and regulations, they are evolving very fast and allowing these companies to actually position themselves even stronger in the low carbon economy of the future. But before we get into perhaps the global regulation that I also want to touch upon, because that global regulations are also supporting the business case. But let's just talk a little bit about climate action, and let me talk and tell you a little bit about the Canadian net zero challenge. So like Japan, Canada has also set an ambitious target of reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 40 to 45% by 2030. And the recent update to Canada's climate pledge has been largely prompted by the nation's exposure to physical climate risk and the international shift towards a low carbon economy. The government of Canada also recognized that its private sector, as well as you were talking about, but the private sector will play an integral role in achieving the 2030 and 2050 targets. So to encourage increased climate action within the private sector, the Canadian Ministry of Environment and Climate Change have announced the Net Zero Challenge that was announced here in 2022, in August 2022. The essence of this net zero challenge, well, actually closely parallels that of the GX League. Both initiatives are geared toward reducing private sector emissions and promoting economic reform to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And this will allow industries in, well, both of our countries to position themselves as green, competitive within the low carbon markets of the future. Any businesses operating in Canada can join the Net Zero Challenge, including those with headquarters based in other countries and those that are considered small and medium-sized enterprises. Companies that's taking part in this Net Zero Challenge must set a net zero emission target and transition plan for 2050 or earlier. A preliminary net zero plan must be submitted within 12 months of committing to the challenge, followed by a more comprehensive plan within the first 2 years. The participants of the challenge are to report progress on greenhouse gas emissions, reductions, climate policies, and action on an annual basis. They must also update their net zero transition plans every 5 years to account for the, let's face it, rapidly evolving nature of climate science and international commitments. The last requisite of joining the challenge only relates to public companies, which is to make climate-related financial disclosures. However, there is already much pressure from regulatory bodies and asset managers for companies to report their climate-related risks and considerations within their financial statements. And again, there I really like to also have to report all the opportunities. So you might ask if the Canadian Net Zero Challenge has an integrated emission trading system like the GX League. Well, not exactly. The Government of Canada recognizes that carbon pricing in its many forms is the most efficient way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and driving low carbon innovation. And a separate carbon pricing legislation was actually introduced in 2019 in the form of a fuel charge and an output-based pricing system. So allow me to explain that a bit. The federal fuel charge is a regulatory tax on fossil fuels like gasoline and natural gas. And roughly 90% of proceeds generated by this fuel charge go towards supporting families through annual climate action incentive payments. So it goes back to the people living here. The remainder is used to finance further action to reduce greenhouse gas pollution. This output-based pricing system, also called OBPS, is a performance-based system that requires large industrial emitters to pay a carbon price if their emissions exceed a set amount. So in February of this year, the government launched a proceeds fund linked to the output-based pricing system to support industrial initiatives that reduce greenhouse gases and to support the deployment of low carbon technologies. So as with the GX League, there are several benefits of joining the Net Zero Challenge. The first involves bolstering the recognition of a company that will receive upon the successful implementation of climate policies and actions. The challenge accomplished this by providing a public platform for participants to highlight their achievements in the climate sphere, just like I understand you do. This will not only enhance a company's reputation among its peers, but will also appear more attractive to investors and to consumers. Investors will feel more confident knowing that their companies, their portfolio companies, are accurately and consistently disclosing progress towards net zero, and customers can, feel good knowing that they are purchasing goods that haven't inflicted harm on the environment, and that there is a system behind to ensure that it's not greenwashing. Participants can also stand to benefit from the corporate learning aspects of the Net Zero Challenge. Companies can share best practices like you are doing and guidance and engage in peer-to-peer discussions and receive other forms of support when constructing and implementing net zero challenges and strategies. This aspect of the net zero challenge, closely resembles the forum component of the GX League in that it provides a space for dialogue and cooperation amongst participants, the government and academia. I would just hope that we could perhaps do that across the borders as well and actually learn from each other. I've learned a lot from you this morning. But let's look at the global developments in sustainability and climate-related expectations, as I was saying before. So one of the greatest opportunities to capitalize on is the rise of climate and sustainability-related expectations from company stakeholders, investors, and the public at large. These also represent a major potential risk. The world of sustainability reporting and disclosure has made strides to not only enhance and standardize these disclosures, but to also make them mandatory in order to safeguard investors and consumers from greenwashing and misinformation. Greenwashing describes any kind of practice that makes a company or its products seem greener or more eco-conscious than it actually is. And that note, please let me congratulate METI in developing the world's first government-led guidance for disclosure and engagement for promoting sustainable finance toward a circular economy. I think I read that was back in 2021. So congrats on that. If we go to this year, March this year, there were two major developments in the world of sustainability reporting. The first of which was the release of two proposals for public comment from the International Sustainability Standard Board, so ISSB, now a sister organization to the International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS. The first one, the S1, General Requirements for Disclosure of Sustainability-Related Financial Information, that requires that companies disclose information about their material sustainability-related risks and opportunities. This will enable investors to effectively assess the impact of these risks and also the opportunities on the company's enterprise value. The second proposal, S2, climate-related disclosures, similarly seek to enhance company reporting of climate-related risks and opportunities with the additional mandate of disclosing greenhouse gas emissions. So also in March, the US Security and Exchange Commission released its proposed climate disclosure rule. The proposed rule would require all public US listed companies to report on their material climate impact, greenhouse gas emissions, including Scope 3 emissions, as well as any commitments around targets and net zero transition plans. The SEC wants to significantly improve the state of these disclosures so that investors have access to consistent, reliable, and comparable climate-related information. Despite being badly received by many US businesses and politicians, the SEC's new proposal is part of a broader international movement towards strengthening sustainability reporting, but also the regulations, and investors have also made it apparent that this is the direction they are heading, with the likes of BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street releasing their own expectations of portfolio companies. BlackRock also encouraged these companies to say how their business strategies will allow them to remain competitive as the world progresses towards low carbon economy. Other investor-driven initiatives, such as the Climate Action 100 Plus, are also using the outsized influence of their combined capital to drive progress on climate governance, greenhouse gas emission reduction, and improving the state of climate-related financial disclosures. Both the International Sustainability Standards Boards, the SEC, suggested reporting standards are actually largely based upon the recommendations set forth by the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, so the TCFD. And those focus on presenting information around governance, strategy, risk management, as well as metrics and targets. In late October this year, the ISSB joined the SEC when it voted in favor on mandating Scope 3 disclosures. So if we look at the inclusion of Scope 3 emissions, has remained a controversial topic for many years. And many argue that it's a challenge to account for and manage emissions that exist outside a company's direct line of management. So Scope 3 emissions, as you was discussing earlier, exist within supply chains that might find themselves within the disclosure reports of more than one company. This raises questions regarding the shared accountability for reducing these emissions amongst various organizations. On the other side of the argument, tackling Scope 3 emission is an integral component in the global transition to net zero. For many firms, especially within the financial industry, Scope 3 represents the bulk of their absolute emissions. A lack of transparency around Scope 3 emissions makes it difficult for investors to gauge whether companies are following through with their climate pledges. Those that can deliver Scope 3 emissions, however, will undoubtedly become leaders amongst their peers and attract greater capital from investors. The European Union also unveiled their newly published Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or the CSRD. It is meant to support the EU's Green Deal by helping investors identify which projects and technologies are needed to achieve carbon neutrality. So the CSRD is meant to update and amend the previously used non-financial reporting directive. And it extends the scope of its predecessor, covering nearly 3/4 of private and public companies that operates within the European Union. As seen with the ISSB, the SEC, the CSRD, all of the acronyms, is also shifting towards the mandatory disclosure of environmental and social impacts related to a company's operations. And so to ensure the reliability of the data and safeguard investors from greenwashing, this new CSRD will also require companies to have all information assured by an independent party. So beyond reporting, we also have the arrival of the European Union's carbon border tax. And in 2023, importers will be required to disclose the greenhouse gas emission embedded by the imported goods. And by 2026, importers can also expect to pay a carbon tax on these embedded emissions, starting with steel, cement, fertilizers, aluminum, and generated electricity. This carbon border tax is part of European Union or EU's Green Deal and the carbon border adjustment mechanism. This mechanism seeks to protect the market competitiveness of industries in the European Union by imposing charges on international goods that mirror the cost of domestic climate pricing policies. So strengthened international regulations like these will likely become even more common as the world moves closer to 2050. We can expect more of the world's markets and exchanges to implement their own expectations around climate-related financial reporting and other ESG disclosures. So let me conclude. I heard it from you all, collaboration. It's essential in the global fight against climate change, and no single company or country can achieve a net zero future alone. I again want to congratulate you for taking part in this critical initiative. I believe the combined efforts of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, the GX League, and all of you will play a major role, not only in Japan's transition to net zero by 2050, but in the world's transition. The road ahead will be a challenging one, but companies with leaders that possess both the foresight and determination to prevail will have the best chance of surviving and thriving in the years to come. As I said in a recent speech to the World Economic Forum, luck favors the prepared. Companies must assume the mantle of a steward, planning and managing its resources responsibly with the ultimate goal of generating long-term value for all of its stakeholders and benefiting society and the environment it exists within. I should also mention that a company's board and leadership will play the biggest role in its climate transformation. And so if you're interested in learning more about this, I would invite you to perhaps have a look at the book I wrote called Stewards of the Future, a Guide for Competent Boards. And for those of you who want to significantly perhaps improve your climate change competences and as a result gain a deeper understanding of climate-related governance principles, opportunities, I invite you to join other global leaders for either our Competent Boards Climate Designation Program and benefit from the global insight and foresight to make your companies stay resilient and thrive in a future riddled with uncertainty. And I'm quite sure that many can learn from you as well. And to end with a quote from one of our faculty members, Johan Rockström, he says, if you really want to move towards net zero carbon, you need to think in very concrete timelines. It has to go through more than just scenario planning. It has to become core to your annual work plan. Arigato gozaimasu.
Thank you very much, Ms. Helen Bank-Jorgensen. We would like to now move on to the panel discussion. Let me introduce the panelists. Starting from the supporters, Daikin Industries, Inc., Tokyo Branch, Government Affairs General Manager, and the CSR Global Environment Center, Mr. Kazuma Koyama. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Also from the supporter, Hitachi Limited, Deputy General Manager, Sustainability Promotion Division, Mr. Kazunori Takahashi. My name is Takahashi. Nice to meet you. And as moderator, Energy Analyst, Mr. Yudai Maeda. Nice to meet you. He's connected online today. Mr. Maeda was responsible for climate change at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Currently, he serves as the energy analyst and he's communicating information related to decarbonization. Mr. Maeda, thank you very much for joining. Thank you.
I am Maeda, energy analyst, and I'm happy to be serving as the moderator for this session. First of all, hello, thank you very much for extremely substantive lecture. It was a great keynote speech, insightful, and based upon the thoughts that you have shared with us, we would like to proceed with this discussion. And in going ahead with this panel, we have the businesses who've signed up to the GX League, and already many initiatives are being implemented by these companies. So first, let's hear from those cases. Koyama-san of Daikin, can you share with your experience at Daikin?
Thank you very much. Once again, my name is Koyama from Daikin Industries, Inc. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present. Let me introduce the activities at the Daikin. This is the title, and in the next slide, I would like to briefly go over the overview of Daikin. In 2 years' time, we will be marking 100-year anniversary. Thanks to your support, last year we were able to exceed a sale of 3 trillion, and we are now targeting for 3.76 trillion yen this year. We are basically focused on one primary product, air conditioning system, and 90% of the revenue comes from air conditioning system. On the other hand, we have a global operation, especially we are operating globally very rapidly, and now over 80% of the employees and over 80% of sales are from overseas. We have global operation. Please move on to the next page. So in air conditioning system, we do our business. And these are the social issues surrounding air conditioners, although this is a busy slide. Briefly, as a major trend, as was mentioned in the keynote speech, there is a Paris Agreement and also Montreal Protocol in our industry. This is to reduce CFC, and also in IEA, the demand of an air conditioning system will triple. There is energy issue. There's carbon neutrality, but these days we have the trend of electrification, and from combustion, using electricity, using a heat pump, we are also switching over in warming as well. So these are the major trends. And in air conditioning system, it consumes a lot of energy, and it also has a CO2 emission. There are negative aspects, but this is essential product globally. There are positive perspective, and as I wrote in the emerging issues, of course we have the energy and global warming issues, but when it comes to people's health or improvement of labor productivity, these are essential as well, especially in hot regions. This is indispensable. Please move on to the next page. Since we are working with such products, how to reduce the environmental burden is what we enthusiastically address, especially on this slide on the top. You see gas, FC and R32 gas. This is the name of the gas that we are using, which is a low carbon gas. When you go to the retailer, you see the air conditioning system using R32. We introduced this 10 years ago. And when the other companies use the same technology, we thought that we can reduce CO2 emission level. So we are providing this with a free patent charge. And if you take a look at the bottom, it consumes a large amount of energy. So energy conservation is very important. In developing countries, it is very difficult to disseminate such a product because there are regulations. So as you can see, METI, JICA, or Lawrence Berkeley in the U.S., working with them, we are trying to work on the rulemaking to disseminate more energy conservation. Please move on to the next page. On the other hand, this is our initiative for carbon neutrality. In 2018, we announced a carbon neutrality, and if you take a look at the left, CO2 emission, and 98% are basically emissions from use and disposal in scope 3. And we are trying to reduce for scope 1 and 2. And basically, use comes from electricity, and this is quite a high in number with 230 million tons. And when it becomes the entire market, as you can see in the slide at the bottom, according to IEA's report, toward 2050, air conditioning system will become even more necessary. Against this increasing market, how are we going to achieve decarbonization? That is a major challenge for us. If you go to the right, from our perspective, we have 3 pictures here. Of course, we need to promote the reduction of energy consumption, and also dissemination and the spread of heat pumps, and also recycling and recovery of the CFC gas. And this is what we would like to address for decarbonization. Next page is the last slide. And through these activities, with our R&D division, we are trying to deliver and create value. This is important, but another point that we value is how to structure the market. And it can be broken down into two parts. As you saw earlier, we have been committed from the past in rulemaking process, and also to reach over to larger megatrend. At any rate, not only limited to the creation of values, but we need to disseminate and implement. Otherwise, it will be difficult to achieve carbon neutrality. So as one of the tools, not just us, but with the government and academia, we want to become a company to do that in order to strengthen our foundation. This is what we are currently working on. This concludes my part.
Thank you very much. The products for decarbonization, I think you've pinpointed the right product, and heat pump is very important in the industry. And combination with reusable energy will be one of the keys. When you said creation of market, yes, that's important. And you also mentioned that rulemaking could also be turned into an opportunity. That's important comment. Next, could we hear from Hitachi? And Mr. Takahashi, can you explain what Hitachi has been doing in this area? Thank you very much. I am Takahashi of Hitachi, and thank you for this valuable opportunity to speak to you. In June, we released Hitachi Green Strategy, which I will talk through in my presentation so that it would lead into the next discussion. Our inaugural product was 5 horsepower motor, and we've diversified our business. But after the global crisis of Lehman Brothers in 2009, we went through consolidation and M&A, and by the end of this fiscal year, we will be delisting all of the listed subsidiaries. Currently, we are engaged in these 4 sectors: digital systems, service, green energy, mobility, connectivity, industries, and automotive systems. And as indicated here, green, digital, innovation to be used as growth for sustainable society. This vision was released in April, and we will be leading green transformation through energy transition, electrification, and energy savings. And as indicated, we will resolve environmental issues and achieve both higher quality of life and sustainable society through social innovation business and collaborative creation with our stakeholders. And we think that our strategy consists of 2 cores, 2 areas: GX for core and GX for growth. And we intend to achieve Scope 2 by 2030 and Scope 3 by 2050. And we will be contributing to the reduction of emissions of our clients through the provision of green products. This is the high-level roadmap to achieve this mission. Now, we've omitted existing businesses from this chart, but as investment to new green technology by 2030 in the areas of hydrogen, battery energy storage system, and artificial photosynthesis, we will embark upon business development, and as enablers, we will be one of the pioneers in information disclosure and make this a business opportunity. In the area of GX for core, internal environment initiatives will consist of decarbonization and circular economy. The 2024 target for Scope 1 and 2 is 50% reduction from the base year of 2010. And in the 3 years' time, we will invest 37 billion yen. And we will also strengthen our initiatives in circular economy. And we've come up with aiming zero waste to landfill from manufacturing sites and apply eco-design for new product development. And GX for growth is another area, and this is the plan for decarbonization for each of our sectors. Contribution to green will be driven by Hitachi Energy, our subsidiary based in Europe, by supplying clean power through non-fossil fuel generation of energy. The target is contribution to reduction of emissions of 100 million tons by 2024 through energy transition, electrification, and energy saving. This is the growth model for the environment business. As written at the bottom half of the page, we intend to capture customers' essential issues comprehensively, combine that with individual solutions, and offer that to our clients. And then in the next phase, as indicated on the upper half of this page, we will realize both sustainability and customers' growth along with customers through understanding customers' management issues and be selected as their partner. And in our green strategy, R&D is also given weight as priority items in the energy transition area in the midterm hybrid trains, and further ahead, water electrolysis-based hydrogen value chain in electrification, motors, inverters, and EV components, or X as a service. Value maximization in energy savings, circular economy, and carbon negative. These are the priority areas. I've introduced to you Hitachi's green strategy. We are a conglomerate, and as a conglomerate, we have green business model. We're also engaged in R&D investment, which does not deliver immediate financial returns. Now, these are items that are difficult to evaluate just through the reduction amount of Scope 1, 2, and 3. But these are some of the issues that we need to deal with as we wish the stakeholders, including investors, to evaluate us fairly. Thank you very much. Thank you. In the case of Hitachi, the solutions you offer are really diverse. And also, you said that you will be standing side by side with your customers to support them, and I think that's one of the important points as we go ahead. I was starting to talk about this, but sorry, I failed to introduce one very important person. So should I give the microphone back to the MC because I forgot to introduce one important member? Then let me introduce Ms. Helle Bank-Jorgensen is going to join us in the panel discussion, and thank you for staying on, Helle. And finally, Mr. Nakayama of METI has now newly joined us in this panel discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you. We heard the two cases of two companies. They've shared with us the concrete initiatives that they are engaged in. Helle, how did you feel after listening to those two presentations?
Well, I'm very impressed of all the things that you're actually doing, and I think Mr. Moroma-san, in terms of looking at the products and saying we need to also ensure that we as human beings don't live in a world where it's so warm. So we probably need that air condition, and unfortunately more and more of it. And so that interrelated, how we all have all of these different aspects interrelated, I think that is important to think about, and then see how can we innovate to actually get to those solutions where we reduce the carbon footprint of that, but still as human beings, are able to actually breathe. We know health is impacted by the temperature, and also, of course, productivity. And again, also with all the products, and I think you're doing a lot of very, very interesting, both in Japan, but also globally.
Thank you very much. Hele, thank you for that comment. In Hele's presentation, opportunity or chance was repeated. There are both risks and opportunities. So we've heard from the two companies, and they both talked about the importance of capturing those opportunities. Once again, I would like to ask the business leaders. Decarbonization in itself has opportunities, but how do you think that you can capture those opportunities and achieve growth? What is your company's policy or vision to capture those opportunities? You've already touched upon that in your presentation, but what do you think about capturing opportunity? I think that's one of the most interesting point of the audience. Daikin, please.
Thank you. In terms of opportunities, as I mentioned in the presentation, air conditioning industry itself is probably lucky. The market itself is going to expand, and there's a simulation by the international institution as well. But at the same time, we need to reduce environmental burden. From our perspective, how are we going to create a new market? I talked about the energy conserving air conditioning system, but the dissemination, if bad energy efficiency products are disseminated, that is not good for the environment. But if it is too energy conserving a product, it's too expensive. People cannot afford. So in public-private partnership, we need to work on the rulemaking. So not just the industries, but the government and academia, and together with the NGOs, we need to first of all create the market. That is what we value.
When the market expands, new rulemaking is key. And it's not just the company that needs to participate, but governments and NGO. You're mentioning NGO was quite interesting. In the context of decarbonization, the civil society has been very active. So is that how Daikin thinks about it?
Yes, as my experience, I did work on the energy conservation in Brazil. And to the citizens there, it is the role of the NGOs to speak on behalf of the citizens. There are details, but what we are aiming at are the same, although there are differences in detail. But I think that is what we should do.
Thank you very much. Now going on to Hitachi. Thank you for the question. First, Hitachi's main customers in the B2B, there are many customers who are confronted with social challenges. And these customers need to engage in decarbonization. And many inquiries are received from our customers regarding how they can decarbonize. In terms of regulation, some of the EU directives are of good reference. I said Hitachi Energy is based in Europe, a group company, and they are engaged in the power grid system. Renewable energy will increase, and with electrification evolving, this power grid system is going to gain in importance. According to IEA, whatever the scenario, power consumption will increase in all of those scenarios, and that would constantly require power grid, and that's exactly where we find business opportunities. In Europe, railway system, we have a European headquarters. You think about railway, but hybrid or electrified carriages will become mainstream, like in the case of automotives. And EU taxonomy is making a big influence, and how can we engage in green business in the context of the EU taxonomy? I think those are some of the points that we need to keep in mind. So in the era of decarbonization, Daikin spoke about the market, but there's a market that's expanding, and you mentioned taxonomy, but we have to be careful of the rules. So those points have to be taken into consideration. And I think you're saying that rules also should be taken as opportunities. Is that right? Yes. Rules themselves, yes, it's difficult to comply, but we can't ignore them. So how can we take advantage of the rules as we try to develop our business? That's a key. Thank you very much. Now, Meti, Nakayama-san, let's hear from you. We talked about rules, we talked about market, we talked about collaboration with the public sector. You are in the position of supporting Japanese businesses. So what's the kind of policy you want companies to introduce as the supporter of the business circle? Thank you very much. The two business representatives talked about rule-making and market creation as being two sides of the same coin, and that's exactly true. Rather than METI want to request to the business, it is METI that needs to update our concept and update our policy. What I'm saying is, in the case of rule making, we shouldn't do as we did in the past, doing all the discussions within the government offices alone. And I think we need to listen to the views of other stakeholders. So GX League is engaged in activities concerning rule making, which is wonderful. So we truly hope that we can receive more opinions from the business circle, which will be contributing to the growth of those businesses as well. So we want to support companies by so doing and by also listening to the opinions raised in the business sector. Thank you very much. Things are moving fast, so you don't want to be left behind. So there needs to be more collaboration between the private sector and the public sector so the rules don't run behind. Thank you. Again, Hele. What do you think? Businesses are growing. You mentioned Orsted and Walmart as case studies in your presentation. But companies that grow, what's the key? What's the secret? What's the clue?
I think the secret, I think the clue is to give access. And to what was just said, it is to get ease. It's making it easy for us as consumers, making it easy to actually be having products that are carbon neutral or even carbon positive. And that making it easy, giving access. That's also what we talk about when we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, giving people access to what we need, the world that we want. And for us as leaders, for us as companies, to say, how can we ensure that we make it easy for the consumers or the B2B, our customers, and because if we are B2B, there is also an end customer somewhere. How can we make that easy? How can we make those choices easy? And I think that's where the secret lies, is that we should not make this complicated, neither for the consumers, being that the end consumer or the B2B, but really use our innovative power to figure out how do we give access to people. So it is a natural choice. It's not a choice where they said, oh, should I choose this or this? But it's the easy choice that is also the right choice for us all.
Thank you. That was extremely clear and insightful. Access, and don't make things complicated. Simplicity is important for the consumers. And I think we should be trying to wear their shoes. We've talked about opportunities and chances. Decarbonization was mentioned in your presentation. Hele, you talked about the transition risk as well. So we should not dismiss risk either. There are diverse risks. And what about risk? Depending on the sector, there could be sectors that don't face such high risk, but with time changing and evolution taking place, I believe that all companies will have to take care about the risks. So how does each company capture risk, evaluate risk, and try to manage risk? Let's ask Hitachi to answer first this time. Thank you for the question. Risk. Not climate risk, but geopolitical risk also has begun to emerge. There's so many business risks, and we have to make judgments one by one. It's become a very difficult world to live in. So regarding climate change as well, business will grow in areas where investment will be required, so we will try to observe the trends of the customers as we make investments. We are in the automotive components business as well. ICE cars, internal combustion cars are going to be replaced by electric vehicles. This is a major trend. But we did provide components to ICE cars. We have to shift to EV automotive components. On the other hand, when we evaluate as a business opportunity, there's a case. It's not just electrification, but case. There's so many different types of EVs as well, and we think competition will intensify. And how can we survive in the intensified competition? So we have to not just think about climate change, but how we can secure competitiveness. So it's not just climate change, but how we can ensure the total competitive advantage. Thank you very much. You gave the example of automotives, and that's exactly a market that's rapidly changing. So setting timelines or forecasting how the market will unfold is going to be important. And later I want to take up the subject of across-sector initiatives. What about Daikin?
Thank you. In the presentation, as I said, the products that we cover consume significant amount of energy, and in CSC gas, we are creating impact to GHG, and this was the case from the past, and it is not possible to rapidly reduce to zero, so it could be a risk. But as Helen mentioned earlier, there are benefits of the air conditioning system. The world without air conditioning system may be too extreme, but how are we going to respond in terms of the benefits and risks? We need to increase the number of communication globally. This is what we are currently considering. Air conditioning system, depending on regions or countries, there are hot countries and there are cold countries, and the types of air conditioning systems used are also different. They are quite diversified as well. So from that perspective, we want to ensure to have correct communication.
Thank you. Communication. So delivering messages, that's important, and it's a great insight. In the area of decarbonization, there's asymmetry of information. So through communication, delivering messages is important, not just to capture opportunities, but also to manage risk. Again, back to the government side, METI. How do you think about transition risk? Japan will face transition risk as we strive for decarbonization. How does METI evaluate that risk? I think there are a few roles that the government can play, one of which is predictability, securing predictability by releasing a vision. this is the kind of society we are aiming to establish. So that would give the stakeholders predictability. That's one role that government can play. And more practically, guidelines, like guidelines on information disclosure would be useful, something that government can create. And another area would be, and this is more fragmented, but there are company-specific expertise that cannot be shared, like something companies will not be so willing to share with their competitors. So how do we deal with that? Many companies may be faced with the same problem, so through such commonality, they may be able to share such information, and that could be done by the government offering a venue for them to share such information. GX Studio, that was raised in the first session, is one such example. We are attempting to offer such venues so that companies can find others who face overlap in terms of business areas and problems. So I think that those are some of the things that the government can do. Thank you very much. First point you mentioned was predictability. I used to be a government official, so policy predictability and guideline making. We heard strong voices from the public sector wanting for the government to be engaged. And if the government makes clear the banner, I think that it will make it easier for companies to engage in action. And also communication, offering a place of conversation is important. Now, decarbonization is no longer an area where one single company alone can do. Collaboration between a number of companies would be the key. So in terms of corporate collaboration and partnership, I think that's very important. Hele, do you know of any best practices on the global stage where there's been great partnership between companies?
I think we have a lot of great partnerships, actually, different places and in different industries, also the hard-to-abate industries. I think just to go back to having clarity, it's not only good for the companies, it's also good for investors. And I think one of the things we have to deal with is, yes, we have geopolitical issues. Yes, we are living in a fragmented world. And I think we need to start looking at how are all of these things impacting each other. More climate-related events are impacting us socially. It's impacting us from a geopolitical issue as well. So many of these things, we can't see them isolated. We need to see how they all are related. And I think that is us again as leaders that have that responsibility to look at that and see how can we do it. In terms of the different sectors working together, there are definitely a lot of sectors at the moment to say, how can we really go and have these big issues and these big systemic issues, and how do we deal with them? There's also the X Prize that I was just in a conversation with here a few days back, that are putting out competitions in terms of how do we get to ensure that we have the innovation ready, and where we have investors that are willing to put money into new industries, new innovation. And that could be with existing companies, or it could be smaller new startups doing that. And I think we need to have that clarity, and we need to have that understanding of the different business, but also their transition plans. We are not going to do like this and then we have it done in 2 seconds. We need to look at that, and we need to be able to communicate our transition plans. But again, have that very clear pathway so we both can explain it, but also that something is not just changing every single day. No one likes to have surprises like that.
Thank you. The Japanese government talked about the predictability, but that applies not only to policy, but also the private sector's transition plan as well. Private sector companies have to show predictable transition plans and to share that with various stakeholders. I guess that's what you said. Thank you very much. It was very insightful. Now, how would you respond to partnership from the perspective of companies? Daikin?
Thank you. In terms of collaboration, it seems simple, but it's quite difficult. There are 2 points. In the air conditioning industry, intra-sector collaboration in terms of communication, it may be one of the possibilities. And the second one is more recent, as we discussed in the morning session, the contribution to reduce. And that may be one of the themes, not just avoided emission. This is something that we all need to address, not just Daikin. So this avoided emission is one of the major themes.
According to what you said not only across the sector, but within the sector as well, right?
Yes, inside the industry and also horizontally beyond other sectors, both of them are required.
Thank you. What about Hitachi? Thank you. In order to achieve decarbonization, of course, we alone can't do that. We have to think about all of the participants in the value chain and the supply chain. For example, regarding Scope 3 information disclosure, which is being required nowadays, we can't do that alone. Parties have to collectively gather information. So I think digital is a key here. Koyama-san talked about the avoided emission, but as a value chain output, how can avoided emission be evaluated by investors? I think that's an important perspective. Thank you very much. In the case of Hitachi, you mentioned diverse solutions, and you're providing that to several different customers in different sectors. We are in the times today, and you talked about market expansion, but the demand is increasing. So in the case of company partnership, corporate partnership, are you thinking that this is becoming a trend? If I may give you one example, when you say railway, you only think about railway carriage, but mobility as a service in Italy, we offered a system in Italy, and public transport in Italy to be made smooth, to embarked upon and debarkation. And rail alone cannot do. We need a traffic signal system and various digital tools to be combined. And that is only possible only through cooperation with various different stakeholders. So not focusing on just one product, but how that product could lead to service. That's where the demand lies. Thank you very much. Now, we talked about business partnership, but what about public-private partnership? METI. What is METI's concept here? Thank you very much. This overlaps with what I've already said, but business and rules being connected or practical challenges, we have to listen to the voices of the businesses. We need such information from the businesses in order for us to support effectively, support in way of institution building, regime building, or communication, or matchmaking, and referring them to friends and peers who are faced with the same challenges in switching decarbonization into opportunities. I think that's what's important for governments to do. Thank you. We're beginning to run out of time, but what do you expect out of governments, Daikin and Hitachi?
Yes, allow me to start. Now, this is a challenging action of GX League, and you just started this initiative, and I would like to thank for organizing this scheme. And in terms of the avoided emission, this may not be related to the government, but I hope that this would be part of the industrial policy, and you have given us the opportunity to discuss with the other members, and we hope to work on this for long term.
Thank you, Hitachi. As discussed this morning, rules have to be made globally. So global standardization of rules is very important. If we have diverse Galapagos rules, we can't comply with all of them. So harmonization and standardization is important. Thank you. Thank you. Last but not least, Hele. We've heard many points. And what's your expression to Japan and to the GX League?
Well, I think in terms of the avoided emissions, actually many years back when I was an accountant, I actually signed off in terms of the avoided emissions. So there was some verification behind the numbers of how much emission was avoided by a company. I think the other thing we need to talk about is the system and public-private partnerships. And I've seen that many places. We need to have everyone around the table, and public-private partnerships are not as easy as it sounds. But if we only have one party, then we are not going to have that systemic change that we really need. So we do need to have everyone around the table, and we do need to have that vision and see where is it, what does the future we want look like, and how do we get there together and have that communication. I think that is the most important part here, because otherwise we're all going to do our own small things that is fantastic, but will not get us to where we need to be.
Thank you. In this session, we were taught of the importance of sharing vision. And in fact, the GX League is a league of partnership between the private and public sector. So we hope that GX League can continue its activity as well. Now it's time to close this session. Thank you all for participating. Thank you very much for the valuable comments, and we wish we had time to continue to listen, but this will be the end of the program. Finally, I will ask Nakayama-san to summarize the discussion and deliver your closing remarks. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining this event. We've heard about what we've done in GX League to date, and I think this was a great opportunity for us to share that information with the audience. METI is going to make policies to make decarbonization opportunities for growth. And we value your feedback from the companies that participated, and together let us work towards that end. And also to the audience, this GX League framework that we're engaged in is a tool to visualize the initiatives being pursued by different companies. So we ask you to check from time to time the information on GX League and to learn that companies are really actively engaged in decarbonization and their specific projects. So when you have to make a choice as a consumer to buy a product, we hope that such information will be of good use. Thank you.
With this, we would like to conclude GX League Symposium 2022 Autumn. On the screen, you will find the questionnaire for the viewers. If you have time, we would like to ask you to fill out the survey. It's a simple questionnaire taking only 3 minutes. Thank you very much for joining today.